Good day from Washington. We are coming on the air with some breaking news. Just a short time ago, President Trump declassified a controversial secret memo alleging anti-Trump bias within the FBI and Justice Department. The release of this memo, which was compiled by House Republican staffers on the House Intelligence Committee, comes against the strong objections of the FBI, which earlier this week expressed, quote, grave concerns about the memo's accuracy. Democrats on that committee have called it an attempt to undermine Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. So for more on what's in this memo, what it alleges, let's turn to our justice correspondent, Pete Williams. So, Pete, what's in this memo and what is basically the big headline allegation here?
This is the memo, Chuck, and clearly at the top it says unclassified, meaning the White House has declassified it so that it can be more fully discussed by the House. It basically is what everyone expected it to be. It says that the FISA process, the process of obtaining a secret court warrant to intercept the communications of Carter Page, a person who was advising the Trump campaign, was improperly obtained. It was tainted, they say, by the fact that the FBI relied on Christopher Steele, someone who was a former British agent who compiled that famous dossier. And they say that not only the renewals depended on it, but so did the initial request to get a warrant to intercept his communications. And they say that the FBI told the committee that they would never have gotten the application in the first place had it not been for the Steele dossier. In other words, the memo says the Steele dossier isn't just something that was mentioned in passing. It was the central pillar of this request. And therefore, they say the whole thing is tainted. The title of the memo says everything, Chuck. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act abuses at the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Let me ask you this, Pete. How often does the FBI or our intelligence community, but particularly the FBI, primarily use somebody else's information to get a FISA warrant? Basically, information that they didn't compile. Maybe it's from a foreign intelligence service. How often does that happen?
All the time, both because in the foreign intelligence realm, you're often depending on information provided by foreign governments, but it happens in criminal cases all the time. And I think this is going to be a central discussion about this memo. All the time, the prosecutors go to judges and ask for warrants based on the testimony of informants who are not always the most savory people. And so the legal question here was, is there some reason to have depended upon this person? What the House Republicans say is no, he was tainted. What I'm sure we would hear from the intelligence community if they ever did respond to this was he was a credible person and there was other evidence to support the application in the first place. Whether the FBI is going to respond to this, frankly, Chuck, I doubt.
Right. Well, they say they wouldn't have gotten the FISA warrant without the Steele dossier. I guess the question is, would the Steele dossier alone been enough to get the FISA warrant? Do we know the answer to that question?
No, and the memo doesn't answer that either.
Well, fair enough there, Pete Williams. Thanks very much. Let me go to the political side of this dispute. It's to our chief White House correspondent, Hallie Jackson. So, Hallie, this is a political decision more so than necessarily a oversight decision.
Well, it depends on who you talk to, right? Because House Speaker Paul Ryan would say it is an oversight thing. President Trump clearly does see it as politics. It is hard at this point to separate the politics from anything else, just given the atmosphere that has been created by this memo. President Trump, just within the last maybe 20 minutes, talked about this while he was meeting with North Korean defectors. He was asked about this memo specifically. I'm going to play you what he had to say, and then we're going to talk a little bit about a comment that he made that I think is really significant and is going to drive a lot of the storyline today. Watch.
I think it's a disgrace. What's going on in this country, I think it's a disgrace. The memo was sent to Congress. It was declassified. Congress will do whatever they're going to do. But I think it's a disgrace what's happening in our country. And when you look at that and you see that and so many other things, what's going on, a lot of people should be ashamed of themselves, and much worse than that. So I sent it over to Congress. They will do what they're going to do. Whatever they do is fine. It was declassified. And let's see what happens. But a lot of people should be ashamed. Thank you very much.
Okay, so very strong comments from Donald Trump, who Chuck was tweeting about it this morning. He believes, and he made as much clear, that there is apparently anti-Trump bias. He thinks inside the FBI, the DOJ, that this has laid bare. That is his and many Republicans' argument. The Democrats' argument, and I'll tell you, I've been on the phone and texting with sources here, the pushback is that this memo is cherry-picked, as you and Pete have alluded to. They say that this does not paint a full picture of what happened. But let me tell you something else interesting. On the way out of the room with reporters that were there in the West Wing inside the White House, somebody yelled a question to the president, as often happens, about Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, asking about the memo. Do you still have confidence in him after reading that memo? The president's response, you figure that one out. And I think that that is significant, Chuck, and that tells you where the story is going today, with some serious questions now about the fate of Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, the guy who oversees the special counsel investigation, Chuck.
Right. Well, that's right. And because the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, recused himself, it's Rosenstein that called for Mueller to be appointed. He hired him. He is the person, the highest ranking person at Justice who has the legal authority to fire him. And that's what this potentially sets up. If the president fires Rosenstein, what does that mean?
And let me just tell you, somebody who's been in that briefing room, Chuck, the entire year that Donald Trump has been in office, there have been a lot of questions about, does the president have confidence in X person, in X official? The line from the White House is in many cases, the president, until we have a personnel announcement, we'll leave that to the president, or the president does have confidence. So it's significant that in this instance, the president didn't A, ignore the question, or obviously B, affirm his confidence in Rosenstein. He seems to be delivering a very ominous hint over to the Justice Department here.
All right, Hallie Jackson, our Chief White House correspondent. Hallie, thanks very much. To sum up, again, the president has declassified a memo written by House Republican staffers from the Intelligence Committee that alleges political bias essentially being used to target a Trump campaign official. In this case, his name was Carter Page. The allegation is that a opposition research document, the so-called Steele dossier, was essentially the primary source that was used to get a FISA warrant to target this. And that is what's being used by the president and other supporters of him to allege there is bias up and down in the Justice Department and in the FBI. Obviously, you've heard a lot of pushback. This is turning into very much a vicious political debate. We will have full coverage of this throughout the day on NBCNews.com. Obviously, a complete wrap-up tonight on the NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt. And much more this Sunday on Meet the